We're joined live now from Washington by one of the top Democrats on Capitol Hill. That's House Assistant Democratic Leader James Clyburn of South Carolina. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan.
So, Congressman, Speaker Boehner came out today and said that he's holding a vote on extending all the Bush tax cuts in 2 weeks. Now, Democrats are trying to get them extended just for the middle class, as you know. And if you look at the polls, it's clear the public is on your side and the president's side. So how are you going to leverage that support in time for the vote that the Speaker was talking about today?
Well, I don't know what we'll do with that, Jonathan, except to say that I think that the American people are also saying that they want to see us do something about the deficit. And we do know that those cuts above 250 will add to the deficit significantly. If we want to reduce the deficit, then we ought to go forward with tax cuts only 250 and below. All income over 250 ought to be done away. Those cuts ought to be done away with, and we ought to be contributing all of that to deficit reduction. And I think that the American people would like to see us go in that direction, and that means there are two things that we can agree on here: that the middle income ought to get a tax cut, and that we ought to do something to reduce the deficit. So I would hope that Speaker Boehner will listen to the public on this. We'll take a look at the surveys that you're looking at to see exactly where the public is and respond accordingly.
Congressman, Speaker Boehner seemed to be engaging in some revisionist history today on the sequester. That's the name you folks in Washington have given to all those spending cuts that came out of last year's deal on the debt ceiling. Let's take a listen to what he said.
The sequester is happening because the president didn't lead. He wanted an increase in the debt ceiling so that he wouldn't have to deal with it twice before his election. But the president hasn't lingered to work with the Congress on jobs or to resolve these big issues.
Congressman, you were one of the leaders in your party who sat on the bipartisan super committee which worked on the sequester. These were cuts that Republicans also agreed to. Now they're saying all the cuts to defense and other programs are the president's fault. Are they being fair to him, and are they being honest with the voters when they say that?
They're not being honest at all, Jonathan. You may recall, prior to the super committee, two big things took place. There was the so-called Biden group. I was a member of that group. We had about 10 meetings. Just before the last meeting, Eric Cantor, the majority leader, walked away from the talks. He was followed a few minutes later by Senator John Cowell, and only Democrats were left to try to negotiate. Then we found out within minutes that the Speaker and the President had been engaged in some discussions. We kicked it up to them, and the President thought, and I think the public remembers this, the President thought that they were on the verge of doing the so-called grand bargain, a big $4.5 trillion deficit reduction plan, and the Speaker came back to his conference, and for some strange reason, a few hours later, we found out that everything was off the table and the Speaker couldn't move forward. Now, that's exactly what happened during all of this, and I don't know why Speaker Boehner's memory is so faulty on this issue. But the Democrats have been working this issue for a long time, and we still are committed to trying to find common ground on this. When we went into the super committee, I made it very clear in a piece that was published by the Washington Post on the morning of our first meeting, that if the distance between me and any opponent on issues in that committee were 5 steps, I didn't mind taking 3 of them. And I think that we demonstrated time and time again that we were willing to do that, except that the Republicans decided that there should not be any compromise. And they seem to be still in a no-compromise mode, and that is not how you make good legislation.
Congressman Clyburn, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.